The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Election interference, cyber threats, and good old-fashioned espionage. Canadian intelligence agencies have their work cut out for them in an increasingly complex world. Tonight, how well are they adapting, and are we meeting the expectations of our allies? Then, Minister of Finance Peter Bethlenfalvy on the numbers and the government's priorities laid out in Ontario's fall economic statement. It's Wednesday, November 16th, and that's ahead on the agenda. National security threats this century can look quite different than last. So when the Prime Minister recently called out China for, quote, aggressive games targeting Canadian elections, it sent a collective shiver down the spine of those concerned that Canada isn't quite on top of this complicated new reality. With us now for their assessments, we welcome in Chelsea, Quebec, Vincent Rigby, former National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, currently a visiting professor at McGill University's Max Bell School of Public Policy. And in the nation's capital, we have two senior fellows from CIGI, the Centre for International Governance Innovation. There's Besma Momani, who's also a professor of political science at University of Waterloo. And Wesley Wark is here, who served 2 terms on Canada's Advisory Council on National Security. And we're delighted to welcome Besma and Wesley back to our program, and Vincent Rigby, you for the first time. So great to have you all aboard. I want to start by just reading 4 short précis of recent stories about Canada's place in the global intelligence landscape, and then I'll get you three to comment. Number 1, last month, Norwegian military security services arrested an alleged military intelligence agent from Russia who lived for many years as an alleged Brazilian national in Canada. Number 2, Canadian authorities have been alerted to the existence of 3 Chinese so-called police stations in the Greater Toronto Area in predominantly Chinese communities. Number 3, last week, Global News broke a story about the Chinese consulate in Toronto funneling funds to at least 11 federal candidates during the 2019 federal election. And the last one, a few days ago, the RCMP arrested a Hydro-Quebec employee accused of sending trade secrets to China. Some recent stories plucked from the headlines. Vincent, start us off. All of this has happened in the last month. What do these stories tell us about the challenges that Canada's intelligence services are facing?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that we are basically looking at a world that is extremely, extremely turbulent. So the headlines that you just discussed or mentioned reflect that reality, and in particular, a world where we've seen a resurgence of great power rivalry, and we have a hostile state actor like China, and it is very hostile both in its region and in other countries, flexing its muscles a little bit. And so you've seen a lot of this over the last number of years, but I think it's really been starting to pick up momentum since President Xi came to power, and I think it's becoming really a serious problem for Canada. But I would turn the question a little bit on its head just to say that I don't think it's strictly about what does it say about our intelligence agencies. I think it speaks a lot to what does it say about our perception of national security writ large, of which intelligence is an extremely important component. And I think we don't take national security particularly seriously in this country. We never have, not just this government, but previous governments and populations writ large. We tend to be very reactive. We tend to be very responsive. We're there when the chips are down, but it sometimes takes us a little bit of a while to get our act together. We've not had a national security policy in nearly 20 years, no foreign policy. So we are running a serious risk again of being on our heels and not getting ahead of the power curve with these threats that are out there, because it is a very, very dangerous world. It's not just about hostile state actors. There's all kinds of other bad stuff happening as well. So we need to up our game. We need to up it very, very soon from an intelligence perspective, but from the defense, foreign policy, development, right across the board. Okay, lots to dive into there. I think I'm going to come back to the issue of how seriously or not we take foreign policy and security issues in this country a little later on, because Wesley, we need a little more background first. Do you have a sense of how many, I don't know, call them what you want, foreign operatives or spies we have operating in this country right now?
No idea, Steve. I'm sure there's many from many countries, and this is a, the espionage game is of long standing. What's different about it is partly the aggressiveness of some of the key actors involved, state actors, including China and Russia, but also the tools that intelligence agencies can use when they mount their operations to steal either government secrets or secrets from the private sector, and that's certainly something that's interesting about the recent Hydro-Quebec case that you mentioned. And those tools really have taken spies into the digital world, and the phenomenon of cyber espionage, its capabilities, its ubiquity, is one of the great challenges I think that Canada and many of its allies face. So, we could play a game of trying to count the number of spies, but it'd be very difficult to count their capabilities online, which is really where it matters.
Okay, Besma, how about this? I gather Justin Trudeau and Xi Jinping had a 10-minute conversation at the G20 meeting in Bali, and apparently Mr. Trudeau said things like, he was, quote, seriously concerned, and was pointing out to Mr. Xi about China's so-called aggressive interventions. And I wonder, in your judgment, what kind of impact can that conversation, in your view, have?
I guess, to be frank, not very much. It needs to be said. And certainly, I think, I'm going to echo what both my colleagues have noted. The threat landscape is getting worse, and China is a key actor in this challenge that we face globally, partly because I think also China's changed. We can't ignore this. This is not the same China of 5 years ago. President Xi's consolidation of power, repressiveness is really amplified now at a time that, again, even Chinese Canadians barely recognize in many ways their home country. And this is really quite sad and impacting more than anybody the Chinese Canadian community. In addition to, I think, what my colleagues noted about the international threat landscape, absolutely. China, Russia, and even some regional powers trying to really flex their muscles, thinking of Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, you name it, all are playing a more active role in their regions and in abroad. And part of that is because of the seductive tools that are out there. And Wesley talked about technology tools. And this is really something I think we're going to have to really recognize. So while we're really thinking about spies in terms of individuals, it's not just the individuals that's really the problem in many ways. It's the seductive tools of surveillance, seductive tools of disinformation. These are cheap, easy to deploy. And lastly, because of the domestic environment where, we have enormous amount of polarization in this country, in many democracies, the rise of populist nationalists, which have been, really effectively dividing us. Many of these international threat actors now have an entryway. They have a way to penetrate our societies, to divide us from within. And that's what they're doing. It's a far easier and cheaper tool than trying to cultivate a spy to sort of, pretend to be Canadian or pretend to be, Brazilian in this case of the Norwegian case, and then studying here in Canada. That's going to become rarer and rarer. What we're going to see is more digital surveillance, more AI tools, more all of those emerging technologies being weaponized. And frankly, unfortunately, that polarization from within is just going to make it a lot easier to penetrate.
All right. Having said that, Vincent, let's assume we don't know how many spies they've got actually over here doing their thing. Can we also assume that we've got spies over there on behalf of us as well?
Well, this gets into an interesting discussion because, of course, we don't have a foreign intelligence agency. We have CSIS with very focused on domestic intelligence. It can do foreign intelligence collection, but only on Canadian soil, and that's under Section 16 of the CSIS Act. Certainly, we have CSE, the Communications Security Establishment, which is our intelligence agency that basically does signals intelligence, listening into other people's conversations and that sort of thing. So certainly, CSE is top of game. It is best in class. One of the best intelligence agencies around when it comes to signals intelligence. So absolutely, we've got our ear to the ground. We are listening. We are looking at activities overseas, and of course you need to do this because in order to protect Canadians, you need to address these threats at their source. You need to address them overseas. And I've always said that national security there's two sides to the coin. There's a domestic side and an international side. So definitely, we're doing what we need to do, we're doing foreign intelligence? Are we doing as much as we could be? That's another discussion. And certainly there's been an ongoing discussion over a number of years whether we need a foreign intelligence agency, separate agency altogether. And can we be conducting more intelligence through embassies and that sort of thing? That's a discussion I think that needs to be had, quite frankly. We're probably ready to have that discussion, but we need to have a public discourse. And so we're not really having that in Canada because we don't talk about these threats. We don't talk about things like intelligence very much. And this comes back to the point I made at the beginning. We don't have a strong national security intelligence culture in this country.
Well, let's follow up on that. And to do so, I want to do a quote here from a recent report published at the University of Ottawa that you, Vincent, were co-author of. We're going to pull a snippet out of that and then come back with some more questions here. Here we go. Canadians and their governments rarely take national security seriously. Canada's position on national security seems little changed since 1924, when Senator Raoul Dandurand told an international gathering that Canadians, quote, live in a fireproof house far from inflammable materials. Our history and geography created and then reinforced this attitude. Collectively, we have neglected national security for decades, largely because we could afford to do so. Shielded from major threats, we generally suffered little or no cost for our complacency. Whenever we dealt with national security issues, it was largely in a reactive way, in response to events, and not through a more proactive, structured approach. Okay, we got Vincent on the record there, and then earlier in our discussion about how seriously he thinks we take national security. Wesley, let's get you on the record. Why do you agree that we don't seem to take foreign threats too seriously in this country?
Well, I think our attention is very sporadic, episodic, if you like, and it is definitely reactive. And just reflecting on something that Vincent said a minute ago, I think one of the big challenges moving forward is to really shift the focus of our national security attention. And this is partly the effort, the report that Vincent was involved in, as well as a major project that we launched at the Centre for International Governance Innovation on reimagining Canadian national security strategy. And I think part of the idea here is to come to a realization that our kind of historic understanding of national security just doesn't fit the circumstances at the moment. That historic understanding was really focused on domestic national security threats and dangers that might develop within the borders of Canada. And I think what we have to understand nowadays is that while there remain clearly some national security threats, and there's been a lot of attention to those in the context of the Emergency Act Commission hearings that are underway in Ottawa, but increasingly I think Canada has to invest far more in essentially understanding the world and understanding the nature of global threats. And that requires us to kind of reshape our approach to national security and understand it as a kind of global imperative. I think, to be honest, the Ukraine war has begun to move us in that direction in terms of both, paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine, its regional and global implications, and also the nature of Canadian contributions, including intelligence contributions to that conflict, have maybe begun to change, the focus. But we have to take a more kind of we have to be able to have a more global picture of the nature of threats that might impact on us, on our allies, and our sense of what international security is. And I would just finish, Steve, by saying that it was of interest to me that when the Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, recently gave a speech in Toronto with kind of a sneak preview of the coming Indo-Pacific strategy, one of the things that she mentioned is that she wants to see global affairs invest far more in the kind of expertise it needs on China. But that's only one strand, I think, of a more global effort to understand global threats and to take us away from this preoccupation which has dominated our national security approach for forever, really, which is purely focused on national security domestic issues.
Okay, Besma, before I get you to comment on this as well, let me set up the question by playing a clip of General Andrew Leslie, who not only had a military career, but was a parliamentarian for a while as well. He was on this program a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about Canada's interests in protecting its northern sovereignty, and he had this to say about that. Sheldon's off today, sick. Lorraine Barton's in directing. Lorraine, if you would, roll the clip.
I would submit to you that the current government, certainly, the one I can speak about most because I was a member of it for a time, are essentially pacifist in nature. They don't believe in defense spending. And I think sort of subconsciously and perhaps not so subconsciously, they're willing to fight to the last American.
Willing to fight to the last American. Besma, is he right that we have this kind of pacifist, almost Boy Scout streak in our history that does not enable us to understand that we actually have enemies and interests out there we need to be attentive to?
Yes, absolutely. It is part of the complacency that Vincent talked about as well. It really is this sense that somehow, who would want to hurt Canada, right? You hear this. This is often, echoed. And it's certainly because I think we do have a strong country brand. That's not to ignore that in many ways we are very much favored internationally on some forums. But, in many ways, sadly, in addition to, yes, we will, be happy to fight to the last American, we're also only conscious of our national security when it embarrasses us. So what we don't want is to have someone sneak through our border and go to the United States and harm the Americans. And so we often also really worry far more about not being embarrassed by these, events of national security being trampled through the border. And so I think there is this, misallocation of interest and investment. Certainly, I think national security needs to be invested more, but I think we also need to be conscious that we want to be more defensive in our national security. It's not about getting more offensive. In that sense, I don't want us to get more spies. I don't want us to invest in having a CIA-like system. What I want us to do is to invest in being resilient, in ensuring that we have more investment in digital literacy, for example, because disinformation, all these, technological tools that are going to be used against us are going to be increasingly, as I said, attractive to rogue actors and foreign actors to use against us. So how do we raise consciousness and understanding about how disinformation is being used to polarize us by, again, foreign actors? This is the way I think of the future. I really appreciate Minister Jolie's attempt to suggest that we need to invest in more in-house capacity in foreign affairs. That's another, I think, defensive way of investing in our national security. We lack that in-house expertise. We need more GAC. We need more Global Affairs Canada. We need more investment in international development. We need more investment, I think, in, again, those tools that ensure that we're resilient, that we have a good understanding of the world and Canada's place in it. And, there are a few outliers out there where there is investment, but overall, I'm afraid to say we don't put money towards that. That is not what Canada is well known for. We don't have our, equivalent of the Peace Corps. We don't have our equivalent of all of these tools that other countries have invested in to ensure that we have that defensive capability in terms of talent, expertise, that I think so many of my colleagues on this panel have reiterated as well.
Well, let's see if we have our first point of departure here. Besma says we don't need a CIA-type agency for Canada, proactively sort of on offense out there in the world. Vincent, a moment ago, you said we need to at least have the conversation in this country about whether we need it, but you didn't actually tell us whether you thought we needed it. Do we need it?
Well, a couple of points. And can I make a comment about Andy's comment
Sure.
from your show a couple of weeks ago? Because I watched that show and I thought it was first class, and it was about the Arctic, of course. And I know Andy well. We used to be colleagues at the Department of National Defense when I worked there. I think pacifist is a little bit strong, and if I have a chance to talk to Andy, I'll tell him that a little over the top. And I think it transcends governments. To pick on this government right now and to say, you're not doing enough, I think it goes back through the decades, liberal, conservative governments, and whatever happens in the future, where there's a conservative coming up, I think we need to pick up our game as a country writ large. And as my colleague said, it should be a whole of Canada effort at the end of the day. But we have invested in our defense. We had a defense review in 2017. We're having a defense update right now. We put more money into the budget. Is it enough? That's the question. And I'm not sure it is enough, but it also shouldn't be just about defense. So my issue is we should be looking at defense. We should be looking at development. We should be looking at foreign policy. We should be looking at some of our tools in CSIS, in CSC. So again, going to my colleague's comment, we need to look at all of our tools, all of our assets right across the board. And the UK did what's called an integrated review last year, where they looked at all these tools and put together a really holistic strategy to counter national security threats. And I've been stating quite publicly that I think Canada should do something differently. So it's not just about one isolated element, whether it's intelligence or defense. With respect to a foreign intelligence agency, I'm not sure that I would pull the trigger right now. I think we've got enough problems in our intelligence community, our security and intelligence community, enough issues to address that to start off by saying, look, let's blow the whole thing up and create a foreign intelligence agency. Go big or go home. I'm not sure that we need to do that. There are other things that we can do. We can look at the CSIS legislation right now. We can nip and tuck in some other places. We can do more than nip and tuck in even other places. But I would say that as part of a review of our national security, because I think it's time, as I said, it's been almost 20 years, we should put on the table publicly, do we need a foreign intelligence agency? And there are pros and there are cons to it. Wesley's written about this and knows much more about it than I do. But I think we need to dig into it and we need to explore it as a possibility. So right now, probably not, but have a discussion and let's start to think about it because I think we've all said, so many of these issues are outside of our shores in terms of their source. And so we need more foreign intelligence than ever. We need more capability. We need to have ears and eyes on the ground externally to our own borders, finding out what our adversaries, and it's not just China, lots of other state powers and non-state actors as well that are out there doing some pretty bad stuff. So let's have the debate.
Wesley, we've got 2 no's for an immediate creation of a Canadian-style CIA. Where are you on this?
So this is a very long-running debate, Steve. The first proposal for a Canadian version of a CIA dates back to 1945. We've been talking about it forever. My position on this is that, certainly we need to pick our time to do this, but I think the arguments in favor of having a capacity to gather foreign intelligence that is not simply limited to signals intelligence. The argument for that, I think, is overwhelming. The political will has never been there, and it's difficult to know the circumstances in which that political will would actually come to pass. But I would like to say, Steve, something just in response to Besma's arguments, which I take wholeheartedly, that the idea of creating a kind of resilient Canada in the face of a very changed national security threat environment is important. But I think I would caution about understanding the creation of that resilient environment in terms of thinking about defense or offense. You can't have a resilient environment in Canada in terms of protecting all aspects of Canadian national security unless you have a capacity to know the nature of the threats that are coming at you. And I think, for example, this is what is so fascinating about the fact that the very first charges ever laid on in terms of economic espionage, have just been laid against this individual alleged to have committed economic espionage while working at Hydro-Quebec in a very kind of sensitive research facility. So you can't, in this world of national security threats, you can't just think about playing defense, and it's probably not helpful even to think in those terms. You have to know the nature of the threats, and many of those threats are going to come at you in unexpected ways, sometimes expected ways from foreign actors and not even necessarily state actors. So that necessity, I think I'd come back to the necessity of having a much better capacity in Canada and a much greater attention to the whole sphere of global threats is, I think, so important.
Besma, I want to ask you about multiculturalism and whether or not we are exploiting the fact that we are arguably the number 1 or number 2 multicultural country in the whole world, where people here speak, 200 different languages, whether we're exploiting that for the purposes we're discussing here today. Could we be doing more with that?
Yes, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention, one of the things that I've done and just finished is serving on the National Security Transparency Advisory Group to give advice to the Deputy Minister of Public Safety. And one of the things that we heard a great deal was from racialized communities and multicultural groups about how much damage has been done in terms of the distrust between so many of the national security agencies and these communities. And this is something that can't be ignored because, again, we need to ensure that we have that social resiliency of our multicultural communities in order to ensure that we are strong here at home, first and foremost. So we have to invest in that. We have no clear parameters to be able to provide what information can CSIS collect about communities and individuals. There's no, clear recourse that if you're targeted and mistargeted, where do you go to issue a complaint? These are really important issues. And, Again, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, for example, in the case of the United States, there was this app that was developed by the National Security Agency there that effectively spied on Muslim Americans. And it was a disastrous, outreach or, if you will, activity that really caused so much damage within the community. And that's the kinds of things that we need to prevent. So what I would hate to see is for those racialized communities to be securitized, either seen as a tool in the case of, being used as potential spies, and being targeted, I think, disproportionately in some way to sort of extract information from. So we don't have clear parameters about this. And the national security agencies, in my humble view, have been for too long able to, and because of the lack of attention to regulation on this, to collect information without us understanding what they're collecting and what they're doing with that data. I mean, in the age of, again, artificial intelligence and metadata and the emergence of all these powerful seductive tools before us, what are they doing with that information? Where are they storing it? Who are they sharing it with? And lastly, I'm going to point out an uncomfortable reality that I think many people don't know, but we get a lot of our intelligence from the United States. And that really is very, very disturbing. The fact that we too often, to circumvent our own laws about collecting data on Canadians, what we're often doing is just basically asking the Americans to tell us what they know. And that really is very, very disturbing. So there's a lot of gaps. And I think racialized communities, think of our Indigenous communities, our Black communities, so many of our racialized communities have been disproportionately impacted by this. And if we don't fix that, we're just not strong here at home. We don't have the proper foundation to be able to then turn around and say, hey, all of our great, multicultural communities work with us to protect Canada. That's not going to work if we don't fix the challenge that we have here at home.
Vincent, maybe I can get you to pick up on that, in as much as multicultural communities can be a resource in terms of the issues we've been discussing here as well. But I wonder, are you concerned as well that they could be vulnerable to influences from outside our borders as well?
Well, absolutely. And I was going to pick up on your use of the word exploit, because you said, do we exploit our ethnocultural communities? And I would suggest that if anybody exploits their ethnic cultural communities, it's hostile state actors who come into Canada and try to influence. I'm speaking particularly about China, but it's not just China. It's the Russians, to a certain extent, the Iranians as well. Try to exploit these communities and influence their behavior, and basically use them as tools of their own national interest. So absolutely, it is a concern. And we've seen, you had a couple of the headlines that you said at the outset of the show. All the business over foreign interference right now with respect to China. This possibility, and we don't know for sure, that there may be 11 federal candidates in the 2019 election who were influenced by a Chinese proxy of the Communist Party. So this is out there. It's a growing problem. It's a really serious problem. But just to pick up on a couple of Bessema's points, I think it's really important with ethnocultural communities that we pursue greater transparency on part of the security intelligence community. So in order to get their support and in order to understand their needs and their requirements, we need to be more open about what we do. And I'm not suggesting that suddenly the security and intelligence community, CSE, open up the kimono and show everything under the sun, what we're doing. You can't do that. Even in a democracy, it's not possible. But I am suggesting that we can reach out to these communities. We can have more exchanges. We can talk about their needs, our needs, et cetera. And I think that has been happening over the last few years. And I would strongly encourage that it continue. And CSIS and CSE have both been quite groundbreaking in some of their activities. I think the other thing is you have to look at the workforce of some of these organizations. And for a long, long time, whether it's CSIS or CSE, it was very, white dominated, what you'd expect in a Canada of 50, 60 years ago. You need, I think, security intelligence agencies in the 21st century to reflect the population of the Canada. You need more diverse Canadians in these organizations so they understand these communities and that they're not victims of unconscious bias and things like that. And again, I think CSIS and CSE have been doing some great work in that regard, but I would encourage it to continue because I think it's critically important if we're going to engage with these communities and not have them exploited and to be able to work hand in glove with them. Because again, it has to be whole of Canada. It's not just about the government and the Federal Security Intelligence Agency. It's Wes said this at the beginning. It's the private sector. It's individual Canadians. It's universities. It's everybody because they're all under threat. the threats have changed. They're much more individualized than they used to be in the past.
Wesley, I want to get you to comment on something that you wrote recently about the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee's look into global affairs Canada. The committee looked into it. It wrote a report. You read the report. You wrote the key issue that emerges in the report concerns a lack of detailed engagement by the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Tell me the significance of that finding.
I think it's very important, both in terms of what we expect from a minister in the kind of Westminster-style government we have, that a minister is accountable for the activities of his or her department, whether it's the Minister of Foreign Affairs or any other minister. It is clear that Global Affairs and the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, I think, did a terrific report on this, and really a sort of groundbreaking report. The Department of Global Affairs runs all kinds of intelligence programs, whether they're involved in collection or analysis or reporting or consuming intelligence to conduct foreign policy and understand foreign policy risks. If you don't have a minister who fully understands what his or her own department is doing, isn't engaged in those kinds of activities, isn't kind of overseeing them as a minister must, then I think you face real accountability and governance issues, which is, I think, the key message that comes from this report from the Committee of Parliamentarians. And if we ask ourselves the question of, why does this state of affairs exist? I think it reflects on things that Vincent has commented on, which is it goes to the deeper question of a national security culture. Ministers come into office often knowing little about national security, often perhaps not being all that willing to dive into the national security or intelligence activities of their departments, feeling that this isn't a top priority for them. And so I think what this report reflected is that kind of deeper problem with how we govern and understand and think about national security issues in Canada. And I hope coming out of that report will be a deeper sense that not only internally within Global Affairs is there a need to better govern their activities and make sure that they're all complying the right kinds of authorities and that they're coherent and coordinated, but also the minister starts to pay real attention to it. Because if you're going to, for example, expand Global Affairs' capacity to be able to understand developments in China, well, a big part of that is going to be the intelligence apparatus you have. So you really need the minister's kind of hand on the wheel on this.
Less than a couple of minutes to go here, and Besma, I want to get you on the issue of the revolving door that has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs in this country. We have had a lot of them over the last several years. What do you think that says?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a crisis within foreign affairs. I think there are a lot of particular reasons in the case of both Ministers Champagne and Freeland in terms of why they moved to other departments. And partly it's, I think, just that, foreign affairs is an important post for very ambitious ministers to serve in. But I think that the fact that, for example, Champagne, who I thought was really a fantastic foreign minister, went to ISED, which is a very important department, is just really the emphasis on our economic growth through technology and scientific development, which I think is very much spot on. I think we need to focus far more on emerging technologies, and I think that really intimately tied to all things foreign affairs, because as I said before, that global race, the tools for emerging technologies is going to be, I think, something that will occupy so much of our thought processes and our analysis of the challenges that we face. But I do think it's discomforting, going back to some folks talked about the Freeland, maybe not the Freeland doctrine, but certainly Madame Jolie's presentation to the Monk School. And then we had, of course, Freeland's presentation at Brookings. There were a lot of contradictions in those. And that was really something that stood out to us who study international affairs in trying to really understand what is Canada's perspective, what is Canada's role in the world. And, the fact that we, in less than 2-3 weeks, heard very diverging views is a bit problematic. And this really speaks to the challenge that we not only not have a proper national security framework nationally, but we also are still waiting very much on this Indo-Pacific strategy. It has taken much too long to get. We're waiting for a Middle East strategy as well. I mean, there are so many, I think, missing pieces to really getting to the answer of Canada's place in the world. And this is why, again, I go back to this issue. We need more investment in our in-house capacity. We need more experts. I would rather see far more diplomats than spies. I'd rather see more development specialists than spies. I'd rather see far more investment in, I think, again, lifting and upskilling our domestic capacity than I would in trying to create, again, this sort of CIA equivalent.
To be continued, as they say. Besma Momani, Wesley Wark, Vincent Rigby, great of all of you to join us here on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It seems like just a few weeks ago, Ontario's Minister of Finance was here with some decent news about the province's books, while warning there were still challenging times ahead. Well, we got the rest of the story earlier this week when the Treasurer unveiled the province's fall economic statement. Let's get into the details with the MPP for Pickering-Uxbridge. There's Peter Bethlenfalvy, who joins us now in studio. Welcome back.
Great to be with you again after a few short weeks ago.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Let's go through the numbers here, shall we? Sheldon Osman, our director, shall bring up the numbers now. This is $200 billion worth of spending for the 2022-23 budget. That's nearly $120 million more than was projected in the actual budget that you unveiled earlier this year. And here's a look at how some of that spending rolls out. For healthcare, north of $75 billion. That's almost 38% of all provincial program spending. Education clocks in at almost $32.5 billion. Interest on the debt is a biggie, $13.6 billion. That's almost 7% of all spending. And COVID-19, which is an item you wouldn't have seen on the budget a few years ago, $7.5 billion, time-limited spending, obviously. Let's go through a few more numbers here. GDP growth in 2021, 4.3%. In 2022, 2.6%. And you say employment in September of this year was 2% higher than pre-pandemic February of 2020. Next year, we're looking, though, at smaller numbers. 0.5% increase. In 2024, only 1.6% growth. And in 2025, finally back up over 2%. And what about deficits? Boy, the deficits went through the roof during COVID. The projected deficit in 21-22 was north of $33 billion. Now you say the 2022-23 deficit will be just shy of $13 billion. That's a big number, but it's $7 billion lower than projected in the budget earlier this year. And this was after you announced, as you did last time you were here, a $2 billion surplus in September, the first surplus since 2008. For 2023-24, that fiscal year, you're anticipating an $8 billion deficit. And by 24-25, you are forecasting a very small $700 million deficit. There's no indication in this fall economic statement as to when the budget will be balanced. But if it's $700 million shy in 24-25, I think we can take some guesses, which we may come back to in a second. Okay, lots of numbers there, Treasurer. In your view, what does the public need to know? Which is the most relevant set of numbers there?
You know, the most important numbers are the fact that we have a plan to invest, as you highlighted, in critical areas such as healthcare, education, the infrastructure. We got to build things, not just for today, but for tomorrow. And that we're making progress on the fiscal situation in the environment of a lot of economic uncertainty. You know, seeing the deficit reduce is a good news story. As you mentioned, $7 billion lower than we had thought, which we then can borrow less, which means lower interest costs. All the while, sticking with our plan to make those critical investments, unprecedented in healthcare, education, and infrastructure.
Budgets, of course, are financial documents, but they are not only financial documents. They are also, as you know, political documents. And I will circle back to that little comment I made now about the deficits. One can't help but note that the budget will be almost balanced in 2025. The next election happens to be taking place in 2026. I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right?
It is. It is. And I'll tell you why.
Minister?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. You know in the document, Steve, because I know you went through all 150 pages of the fall economic statement, that we provide scenarios. Because, you know, you don't know any better than I do, than the people of Ontario, what the future is going to hold. What's important in that environment is make sure you have a prudent fiscal plan, that we're transparent and lay out how we're going to spend the taxpayers' money. And every 90 days, every quarter, I'm out in front of the public saying, this is how we spent your money and this is how we think it's going to go. In that document is 3 different scenarios: a faster growth scenario, a slower growth scenario, and what our expectations, which you mentioned, the deficit numbers. If things work out better, we're going to balance the budget even sooner. So that isn't anything we can certainly forecast with precision. And now, if things are worse, the deficit will be higher, and we'll be going to the electorate with a higher deficit.
And what do your forecasters tell you about whether we're going into a recession now?
Well, they've definitely, we rely on private sector forecasts, and we've seen them come down. There's no question. We're not an island here in Ontario and Canada. We're part of the global economy. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine hasn't fully played out. We have supply chain still issues around the world with China and other jurisdictions. We're seeing central banks around the world increase interest rates to combat inflation. So there's a lot of economic uncertainty out there, but we're confident in Ontario's economy and the workers and the businesses here. So I think we're prepared to meet whatever the future is going to hit us with.
I see in the States, though, that they are now kind of monkeying with the definition of what a recession is. I always thought it was 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. They're on the verge of that down there, and yet the president is saying, well, no, it's not a recession, things are fine. Do you agree a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, and are we on the verge of that?
That's the technical definition, and I'm in your camp. That's the way I always understood a recession. I think what they're saying in the U.S., it's also about the employment. And one of the things about the employment, with an aging population, we've got more jobs than we have people. We've got to think, we've been putting money into skills, retraining, skills development, running hard on trying to get more immigrants new Canadians into Ontario. We're expecting, 200,000 this year with the new numbers out of Ottawa. They're targeting 500,000, and about 300,000 of those typically come to Ontario. So that's a good news story, but we got to be ready. We got to make sure we have infrastructure. Where are they going to live? Where are they going to get a job? Where are they going to be able to put their kids in school? Our healthcare system, we got to keep building.
One number that we did not share in that panoply of numbers off the top is what you are now proposing to do in your statement as it relates to people who are disabled in this province. The Ontario Disability Support Program, how do I put this? You kind of took it in the teeth when you introduced the budget. There was a lot of criticism that you were not generous enough with people who, through no fault of their own, are in difficult times, and I think some people expected you to do more on that front. And now you are. You're going to allow people to earn $1,000 a month and still be eligible for ODSP, and you are indexing payments to inflation as well. Let me ask the question this way. Is that an acknowledgement by you and your government that you really didn't do enough in the budget that came out a few months ago?
I think that's an acknowledgement that many governments over the last 20 years, ever since the program was set up, didn't do enough. And, I've always said one of the reasons I got into politics is to make sure that, we grow the economy, get the fiscal house in order, but at the same time, help the people most vulnerable. And so increasing it, as you said, by 5%, indexing it to inflation. No government in 20 years has ever done that. And I also got some great feedback, which I thought was a good policy move because I did it, to increase the earnings exemption from $200 to $1,000, as you said, that they could earn every month without losing any of their other benefits and being able to put that money in their pocket. I've heard from the Ability Center, Community Living Toronto, saying this is a game changer. We've been asking governments for 20 years for this. So is there more to do? Absolutely. There's a suite of programs as well to support people most vulnerable, including people on disability for meals, medicine, dental care, vision, supportive housing, et cetera. And so it's not just the money and the opportunities, a suite of programs, but I think that's the right thing to do.
Let's talk healthcare. Winter is coming. COVID-19 is rearing its ugly head again. Emergency departments are being told to be prepared for potential overruns again. Hospitals say they are struggling again. How much new money is there for healthcare in this budget, in this mini budget?
Well, the budget, we didn't wait for the mini budget. The budget that we ran on back in June, that we got roundly endorsed by the electorate, we came back in the...
By 40% of the electorate, but okay, keep
well,
going.
I don't know, though. That's the way democracy works.
I agree.
And that's the way the rules are set here, and it was a bigger majority, as we talked about last time.
Yes, it was.
So we recalled the legislature in the summer to pass that budget. In that budget is the numbers that you pointed out right at the outset of your show.
120 million more.
No, that's on interest. No, in terms of the spending year over year, $5.6 billion for health, $3.6 billion for education. Should I have waited for the fall economic statement to put that in as new money? No, we got there early. And that's going into all kinds of investments and programs, and that will continue.
Can you hire and maintain the staff that you need to keep hospitals going, to keep schools going, if you insist on capping wages at 1%, as Bill 124 does? I
hear from hospital CEOs that there's enough money. The thing and what I hear, and we hear constantly about the healthcare system, is that we have to think differently about how we provide healthcare. That's why in that budget, I also put a year ago at the fall economic statement, $1 billion in home and community care. You know, that's part of the future. I've put in tax credits so that seniors can get funding to age at home, to put the infrastructure and get home care at your home from healthcare professionals. It's thinking about the way we do credentialing of people who live in this province who've been trained elsewhere, to make it faster for them to get into the healthcare system. It's the 5,000 retired nurses who, if they want to come back into the system, you know, the red tape to get back in was brutal. But so there's a number of things, Steve, that I think is important for the people of Ontario to know, that the money is increasing, it's record amounts. It's not just about the money, it's about the way we deliver healthcare.
No, and I appreciate you're in a tough spot. You can't say yes to absolutely everybody who wants everything. I get that. But when hospital CEOs say, don't worry, we can do it with a 1% wage increase, but all of the, the organizations that represent the actual people who work in these hospitals and clinics and schools and so on say, this bill is not going to do it. In fact, it's going to ensure that people don't stay in the profession and we can't attract the best people into these professions. How do you know who to listen to?
Well, I listened to some of the numbers, the 11,400 healthcare workers that have come into the health system, the record amounts of registered nurses that have been registered this year, the record amount in the history of the province. I look at, the fact is that Bill 124 was a 3-year moderation period, which is almost over for the healthcare for the nurses. So we've also provided retention bonuses for the nurses, the $5,000 per nurse that was paid in May and September, less than 2 months ago. The permanent increase in the personal support worker wages of $3 an hour. That's also in the budget. So we didn't wait for, as you say, the mini budget and the fall economic statement. We got ahead of it.
Let's talk education. The Financial Accountability Officer, with whom you have had a few disputes in the past, but he's an independent, nonpartisan servant of the legislature. He said that your budget has a cumulative shortfall of $6 billion over 6 years as it relates to funding for education. Do you dispute his findings?
I haven't gone through the his full report that came out just as I was doing the fall economic statement. But what I can tell you this is a couple of things. My deputy minister did say the differences in year 1, 2, and 3 are pretty small between his numbers and our numbers. Number two, if you look at that budget that we passed in August, the increase in education funding is $3.6 billion. It's, as you mentioned, the second biggest line item. That's the biggest increase. Now, a big chunk of that is for childcare. A chunk of that is for building more schools, putting more child care spaces in those schools, more funding per pupil, hiring more education workers, hiring more teachers, putting supports in for mental health, putting money in for tutoring and for parents to catch up. So, it's never one thing, it's a whole bunch of things. And, the Financial Accountability Officer can project far into the future. I'm dealing with the situation now, and I'm going out there every 90 days transparently saying, this is how we're spending your money. And I will say the Auditor General, who looks at the numbers, has given us a clean opinion for 5 straight years, something the previous government didn't get. And by the way, the previous government didn't go out every 90 days. I come from the private sector. Imagine not facing your shareholders on your earnings every 90 days. I feel the same way in government. It's absolutely critical that I face the taxpayers every 90 days, good, bad, or ugly, on how we're spending their money.
Your government also promised to create the conditions that would see 1.5 million new homes built over the next 10 years. The studies I have seen says that if you keep going at the current rate, you're only going to get halfway there. So would you acknowledge that the current policy is not going to use a famous three-word expression, get it done?
Well, certainly we inherited an environment where houses and apartments and condos weren't being built in sufficient supply for the people that are coming to this province. Our population is growing, so we got to make sure we have the policies in place. And you and I are of a certain vintage we talked about earlier. We saw some of the early 80s where we had economic cycles with interest rates higher, inflation higher, but we got through that. We saw even in the early 90s a boom in Toronto and then a slowdown in construction. What we're committed to is looking through the cycles and building for the long time. And we've set that target of 1.5 million homes over the next 10 years. We're going to work with the municipalities. We're going to work with all the tools that we have at our disposal, because building 1.5 million homes, allowing people the dream of home ownership, is absolutely critical.
Okay, but we did talk about the fact that the Trudeau government now has a 500,000 immigrant target, and many of them, more than half of them probably, are going to end up here. I mean, does the math add? You're the treasurer. Does the math add up? Can you create conditions that will provide enough homes for all the people who want to live here? Doesn't sound like it.
Well, we're doing all kinds of policies to be able to give us a shot. So, Steve, I'll make a commitment to you. When we hit the 10-year mark, let's have this discussion, and we'll see if we're at the 1.5 million mark. But Lord knows we're going to try, and we're going to work with all those partners. But it's not just the housing. We have to build the schools. We have to build the hospitals, the aging population, the long-term care facilities, the broadband. I put $4 billion in for broadband because, we got to connect people. The small businesses have to have the ability to have broadband to sell their goods. We have to, in the justice system, the healthcare system. So there's many things that we're doing to accommodate the growth.
Let's talk about the provincial gas tax holiday, which was, I gather, originally intended to be just temporary. You are now extending it to the end of next year as well. What's that going to cost the Treasury?
$1.3 billion.
Is that the best use of $1.3 billion?
It's a good use at a time when many people are hurting. Interest rates are very high and costs more on a mortgage. People going to the grocery. I'm sure you have to gas up in your car. Many people are feeling the pinch. And we've got 8 million people driving cars, many in Ontario, many who have to drive their kids to school or drive to get to work. To provide a little bit of a relief, $195 per household for the next 18 months. I'm willing to do that because, and particularly for lower income people, that's a bigger part of their expense base. Every little bit helps. It's not the only thing that we're doing. We've increased the minimum wage. We've set the tax credit rebate, so Ontarians, low-income Ontarians pay the least amount of tax, personal income tax in Canada. We announced, you mentioned the Ontario Disability Support Program and the increase, but also the Guaranteed Annual Income Supplement, which we doubled, which will help low-income seniors, about 200,000 low-income seniors.
Okay, I know you're the Minister of Finance and you're not the Minister of Education, but you're going to forgive my wanting to take advantage of your being here to ask you whether the unprecedented preemptive attempt to use the notwithstanding clause to resolve the education workers issue that you're having, whether in hindsight you guys would do anything differently on that.
I don't think so. I think, our number one priority was to get the kids in school, to keep the kids in school. After 2 years of lockdowns, of missing the social, the physical, the academic, the mental health stresses of not being in school, we felt very strongly that we would use any tool at our disposal to ensure that our children could be in school. Now, you would know as a student of history that, and we could maybe have another show on this, if we could have had the repatriation of the Constitution without the notwithstanding clause in the Constitution. And it's in there for a reason, to be used at the discretion of the provinces. Other provinces have used it. The Premier showed leadership by saying, we want the children in school. We can't get a deal at reasonable terms, so we're going to use this.
Does it trouble you at all that no government of any stripe for almost 40 years even thought about using that clause, and you guys have used it or threatened to use it twice and used it once already?
It's there. We take it very seriously. We're very deliberate and thoughtful about it. And we felt the circumstances were so significant for our students, 2 million students in this province.
You don't feel bad about having to walk it back and repeal the bill?
I feel good that the students are in school.
Okay. One last question here, and that is, I know you're not the Foreign Affairs Minister either, but you did have a meeting with the Hungarian president, Novak, who's a close ally of Prime Minister Orban, who is not what you'd call a poster child for democracy. He's one of the most illiberal authoritarian leaders in Europe these days. And now I know your background is Hungarian, and this would be, I suppose, an important courtesy call for you to make as a representative of this government. Did you have any qualms about what signal that would send to democracy-loving people in the province of Ontario to meet with her?
You know, my focus on I meet with foreign officials all the time, but particularly given my Hungarian roots, there's a plaque at Queen's Park, right beside, or very close to the Whip's office. And it has it's a plaque for the 1956 freedom fighters. And I had a colleague, Rudy Cazzetto, along with Michael Tobolo, who said, we want to do a private member's bill to recognize October as Hungarian Heritage Month. And they got that through. And I'm really grateful to my colleagues for that, because there's some 300,000 people who called Canada home. My parents, when they came from Hungary, there were two countries that were accepting refugees, no questions asked, and it was Venezuela and Canada. And one of the reasons I'm in politics, Steve, I think you know this, is because I really want to give back to democracy. And democracy's not easy. Democracy's hard. It requires hard work and participation. And who said that?
I think John Turner said
there
that.
You go.
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons that I was very proud to meet with the president of Hungary and to acknowledge the many Hungarians who fought in 1956 for freedom and democracy.
Okay, fair enough. Minister Bethlenfalvy, we always appreciate your visits to our studio. That is the Minister of Finance for the province of Ontario, the MPP for Pickering-Uxbridge, Peter Bethlenfalvy. Until next time.
My pleasure.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. Tomorrow, we'll return to foreign affairs and assess the so-called Freeland Doctrine and the government's new Indo-Pacific strategy. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.